It's about accountability, participation, and inclusivity. Measure A seeks to promote a more equitable Sacramento. It increases citizen participation in establishing budget priorities and makes our elected city leaders more accountable for implementing policies that advance equity and economic inclusion and progress in Sacramento. Is everybody able to hear me okay? Good. Measure A increases accountability in government by giving our elected mayor and city council the tools to act quickly and decisively in times of crises and to implement policies that address our most pressing needs. It requires the city to analyze social equity by including racial equity, ethnic equity, LGBTQ, and gender equity impacts of the city budget and major policy decision. It creates a 9th city council district in order to improve diversity on the council and strengthen neighborhood representation. It strengthens the city council by giving it exclusive authority over land use and planning decisions. The mayor's executive authority is checked by a stronger city council. It ensures the city budget includes at least $40 million for inclusive economic development and youth services. It creates a permanent Fair Housing and Human Rights Commission to monitor, evaluate, and invite the City Council on progress made towards promoting social equity. It requires the city to analyze the small business impacts of the city's budget and major policy decision. It makes permanent the city's sunshine ordinance regarding public access to city meetings and records. It establishes a permanent ethics commission with at least one dedicated full-time staff person reporting directly to the commission. It requires the city council to pass a code of ethics for elected officials and appointed members of boards, commissions, and committees. It establishes a term limit for the mayor of no more than 2 terms, and Measure A sunsets in 10 years unless reapproved by the voters.
Thank you. So let's go to Flo Coffer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Flo-Jean Kofer, and I'm the chair of the city's Measure U Community Advisory Committee. And I'm really pleased to be here with you tonight. So thank you to Elmhurst and Southeast Village and Colonial, and as well as Tahoe Park for putting this on tonight. So you've heard what Measure A is. It's a revamp of the Strong Mayor proposal, and it has some new things in it. And I am here in opposition to the proposal, and I want to explain why. First and foremost, you know, we've always called this proposal Strong Mayor, but Sacramento is really a proud city that is filled with neighborhoods. And we're really better when we all work together. And while there are some real challenges to how things are working right now, having our ability to be able to weigh in hampered by concentrating all the power in one person doesn't feel like the right move right now. Half of all the city council members are up for re-election every 2 years. So if there's a problem with, you know, accountability, we have the opportunity to be able to weigh in on that by really changing the composition every 2 years. And, you know, city council members are right now are more accessible. They have smaller districts, and they're required to attend weekly meetings where we can provide public comment at least. And so they're selected to serve our specific communities. And then we have the mayor who's elected to serve the entire city. And sometimes, yes, change can be slow, and no one is probably more frustrated by that than me. But requiring us to get to 5 votes to be able to move something forward can also lead to better policy. It can protect against harmful outcomes for vulnerable Sacramentans. And letting one person override the will of our council is dangerous, and it makes advocating for our neighborhoods much harder. The city manager is reviewed, you know, every day. If there's a problem, we don't have to wait for an election. We can certainly weigh in right now. But the thing I really want to point out is the sweetener that's been added to this measure. And again, probably no one is more frustrated about having to be in opposition to this than me. Actually, some of the ideas that are included in here are ideas that I introduced to this city and that I've been championing. And Sacramento does have real issues and real opportunities to promote greater equity and access. But centralizing power in one person doesn't achieve that. We are on the brink of having some of the most you know, diverse and progressive members of our city council council. And right now, what we're planning to do is essentially change the composition of power right as that's about to happen. And that's not in the interest of equity, certainly. The city council already has the authority to do everything that's in the proposal. They can, we already have an ethics commission. They can certainly make those findings binding. They can follow along with them. They can allocate $40 million to the promise of Measure U as they were supposed to, because that's what they campaigned on. All of these things are certainly possible right now, and they don't need this measure to make it happen. In fact, they've only been added to this measure because it was unpopular otherwise. The first time that this was polled on was last year, and it was unpopular. And there was an opportunity because George Floyd died and people were really upset about the inaction of this city long before that happened, to be able to then tie these together and make it seem as if that's the purpose, but it's not. And you know, we already have a mayor who is strong. He fails on very few of the things that he does, and it's important to also consider, you know, the fact that he'll occupy this office for 40% of the time before we actually get to vote on this again in 2030. And he will do that for 2 years if this passes, with us only having 8 city council members and being required to essentially have 6 out of those 8 votes, which is a very high threshold in order for things to be vetoed through. So please don't fall for the title.
Thank you, Flo.
I think we're out of time, but we'll get to make some more comments.
Okay.
I want to remind people to please use the chat feature if you have questions. So type your questions into the chat feature. So now we're going to go to Councilmember Eric Guerra, and he's got 2.5 minutes. So go ahead, Eric.
Well, thank you, Maggie. And I first want to thank everyone who's come in to join us here today. I especially want to thank Jennifer Faring, who's coming up after me in this, because she, much like many of the folks in the district, reached out when this proposal was put forward to council. And I want to thank those of you who took the time, and particularly Jennifer took the extra time to dive through the details of the proposal. And I think this is a good example. I think Jennifer will talk a little bit about, you know, how we need more of that engagement in the actual details of a proposal to figure out what will be proposed between in front of our constituents. And most importantly, one of the things that we came up with, I think Dr. Kofer mentioned it, was that the current system itself has many challenges, and frankly, in my opinion, has not served our city well. And the big issue that we're facing now with COVID is, what do we do given the challenges that we're facing, and how does the city become more nimble and also be able to address the needs of constituents? And I do want to thank again both those constituents, just like Jennifer, who brought up concerns about how are we going to ensure that a mayor or a city manager respond to constituent needs. Well, one particular thing is city managers right now have no responsibility at all to respond to the constituent concerns of a council member. And in fact, in the past, city managers have and said, go find 5 other council members before I do anything. The other issue that comes about is that even when a council has decided on an action with 5 votes, with the majority, the city manager can determine the pace, and the bureaucracy can determine the pace and the priority of what gets accomplished. Now more than ever, COVID has required us to be more nimble. A good example is, even though the CARES funding was appropriated early on in the first meeting that we had with it, it still took 4 months before we got money out to domestic violence providers when we knew that the issue of domestic violence was on the rise. That's just one immediate example. Another past example has been when a council has acted and then the city manager and their bureaucracy manages its pace, that they've taken on the issue of homelessness. Over a year ago, we approved a homeless shelter to help folks down in who are facing need. And only until today are we getting to that point, a year later, that actual shelter is occurring. Now, none of that I say is ill-intentioned. And it just goes to the point that when a council makes an action, we also want to hold the city manager accountable and a mayor accountable to the bureaucracy. So I think to that point is that the important thing about this proposal is that it puts some affirmative requirements on the city manager. In the language, it says the city manager must respond to those needs of a council member. It also prohibits a mayor in the future, because you got to think about what's the worst mayor going to do, from stopping a city manager from executing those duties. I think the important thing about this proposal that Jennifer and I went back through was the question of timing and whether it's the right time to do this. And we know that COVID is now more than a month of an issue, more than a year of an issue, more than likely. And so we're going to need to have a system in place that has the ability for the bureaucracy to be nimble and act quickly when a council takes action. And so while I think the question becomes, is this the right approach? I think voters are going to have to decide whether the measure solves that solution. But like Jennifer and I looked at this, both of us felt, that the challenges that we're facing are extreme. It does require us to be nimble. Myself, I leaned on the issue of yes, and more importantly, because the last piece that really struck was that after a proposal was put before the city manager, it took almost 6 months before on the issue of addressing resources to the rising cases of COVID in the Latino community in Sacramento for it to come to council. And that's because the city manager has the authority with over the agenda, not just the council.
Time's up. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to go to Jennifer. Thank you, Eric. And you were getting a little fuzzy there at the end. I'm not sure what happened with the sound, but okay, Jennifer, you've got 2.5 minutes.
All right. Hi. Good afternoon, or I guess good evening, everyone. I'm a 11-year resident here on T Street in Elmhurst and a 20-year City of Sacramento resident. And I just want to open by saying I like and I trust Darrell Steinberg, who I know personally, and I've seen him take on big issues, and I find him very effective as a mayor. But I'll be voting no on Measure A for reasons that I shared with both Mayor Steinberg and Council Member Guerra when this issue first became floated and the draft of the initiative became open to all of us to see for a very narrow window at the end of July. And the primary reasons I intend to vote no, I lead with the timing. We are in the midst of a pandemic and a highly charged political situation nationally. I think this issue is divisive at a time when we need unity. It is distracting at a time when we need focus. It is diverting resources and advocacy bandwidth during a critical election, and I don't think that it got sufficient time for public engagement. And I worry that now more than ever, we need people to feel trust in public institutions, and I worry this measure will make people more cynical. That concerns me. I think there has been an absence of sufficient answers to the basic questions of why now, and who is asking for this. And I am deeply concerned, and I think Dr. Kofer expressed it best, but I am deeply concerned as well about the opposition to this measure coming from the very community members who are the most grounded and connected with the equity, diversity, and justice concerns in our communities. And having spent significant time this year personally engaged in developing a deeper understanding of white supremacy and privilege, I feel we need to center those voices who are clearly saying that this is not the answer to the concerns they have about our city. And then I have concerns with the measure itself. I have concerns about the council, the mayor leaving the council in 2021, leaving an even number of members, making it challenging for the better part of 2 years until that a new council member can be sat. That will create very sticky voting threshold issues and give the mayor even more power during that time. And I could have had some of my concerns addressed about the current mayor getting to get this power on his watch if he had delayed his ascendance under this measure until that person was sat as a new council member, but that is not the case, so that troubles me. The permanent allocation of $40 million in the city charter, I think regardless of whether you want that money spent as proposed or not, it is unprecedented to have such a budget allocation done in a city charter. I think we will regret that if we do it. I'm concerned about the small business analysis, which sounds great, but there are other meaningful sectors of our city, like the nonprofit sector, and where I advocate that I would be concerned about the absence of analysis of the impact of future ordinances and budgets on that sector and others. So I find that an odd inclusion. And then finally, I will just agree with Dr. Kofer as well that there is already, I think, sufficient commitment across a majority of the council, as evidenced by a majority who voted to approve this ballot measure being placed, that most of the elements in the measure can be done now without modifying the city's charter. So I wish that the city had gone in the same direction that the city of San Jose did by tabling their proposed strong mayor initiative. Their mayor announced around about the same time this was placed on our ballot that this was not the right time for this. I wish that had been the case here as well, but I will now be voting no because that's the only remaining option that I have to act on my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to take some questions. There was one question in the chat just clarifying when this takes effect, and that it would take effect on January 1, so in the current situation.
Excuse me, point of order. I was allowed to describe the initiative, but I would like the opportunity to respond to some of the comments that have been made if the chair so sees fit.
Well, what we wanted to do was take questions from the audience so you could do both. So one of the questions, and I'll direct it to you, Jim, is, and this has kind of come up, but it's that the issue of the $40 million earmark for inclusive economic development, regardless of the state economy, which has little to do with the strong mayor concept, but it's been incorporated, and how is this appropriate or justified as sound fiscal policy? So basically the question of that this measure isn't just about giving changing the power that the mayor has, but it's also got these other elements that have nothing to do with it in that. So can you want to speak to that? And then if you've got other questions.
Let me just state that the pandemic and the terrible tragedies of racial inequity have really taken center stage about some of the existing longstanding inequities that exist in the way that we do business and governance of the city. We're still doing business under a 100-year governance system, while the city has grown, is more complex, and now with these crises needs to be, as Councilman Guerra has said, much more nimble. The people need to be heard. They were heard on Measure U, and then the will of the people was frustrated. And I think that that's what's created a cry for the $40 million to be guaranteed for youth and social equity that we see in this proposal, which garnered a majority of the vote of the city council to put before the voters. The voters expect certain things when they vote for an initiative, and in the case of Measure U, they did not get it. Now, Measure A is a balanced measure that strengthens the city council. It allows them to elect a president, which of course becomes a co-equal part of government with the mayor, and the mayor will propose a budget. The president of the council and his and her colleagues will do just like it's done in budgets at the state government. Will there be a check and balance? And we're going to be adding a 9th district, which will increase diversity on the city council by having 9 members. And that's another opportunity which will improve access to neighborhood associations. And yes, the council could do some of these equities provisions, but we need to commit for it like we never have done before. And a vote of the people approving Measure A is the kind of commitment that we need to combat the systematic racism that has existed.
Okay, let's go to Flo. Do you want to respond to that? I didn't hear the question get answered about adding additional things, the combination of the mayor with these other policies. Why don't you speak, and then we'll take more questions.
Sure. So thanks. I think that's a really great question. And as the chair of the Measure U committee and the one who has really been championing spending the money like we planned, I think it's important for us to do that. The challenge, of course, is that all of the things that are included in the charter, while they'll be there, they're not actually binding, and they don't actually have teeth in the way that I think most of us who wanted them to happen would want. The council also has the ability right now, with 5 votes to be able to allocate the $40 million like they promised. And actually it should be 50% because that was the campaign promise. It was the second half cent, and they can allocate that exactly how they'd like to. So this again is not needed for them to do their work. And I think that's a really important point to bring up. It's also, again, I believe that equity is the entree. It is our chief purpose, is to be able to provide safety and well-being to our entire community. And when I say safety, I mean things like housing. I mean things like livable wage jobs, not just minimum wage. I mean, really providing for our communities is part of what our goal is as a city. And the idea that we are going to put this off into the charter revision, but not actually make it happen is just lip service. It's making this not our chief aim, but part of a way to be able to give the mayor more power. And I totally agree that it's awesome when we have more council members. If you look at some of the cities, around the world, compared to us, they would have, 120 council members. If you were to look at places like Paris and other places around the world in terms of their representation. So having an additional council member is not objectionable at all to me, but they don't do that while also ceding all of their power and making it so that they have to have a higher threshold to be able to pass things without veto. And what's really challenging about that is that, yes, the mayor wouldn't be able to violate the Brown Act by having what's called serial conversations, but he could talk to everyone when members of the council aren't able to. And so it would be really hard to be able to override a vote that, that had fewer than, 6 votes to be able to make that happen. And so I think those are really important considerations when we think about how all of these things are all lumped in together. And if you're thinking, well, I like that, but I don't like this. Well, I like that, but I don't like this. So am I. And unfortunately, we've all taken a multiple choice test. And if any part of the question is not true, you have to answer false. That's the way multiple choice goes. And so part of the reason why we were advocating for having, these split up was specifically so that you wouldn't have to make a Sophie's choice.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions that are sort of follow up to these. So one of these is, where would the new 9th district be drawn? And does that mean redrawing boundaries? How's that going to be done practically? How's that going to ensure diversity? And I'm going to add another question to that, which is that if 6 council people are required to override, then it does seem like you would have decisions by the minority. So because there'd be 3 council people and the mayor, that's 4 as opposed to 5. Or it'd be 50-50. So how does that ensure that a majority is really making a decision?
Yeah,
So
I can answer both of those.
If I may,
I
Madam
think,
Chair?
well, I know, Eric, do you want to take that, Eric, just because I know you've got to go to a meeting?
Yeah,
So-
I've got to jump off here, but yeah. So let's start off, I think, with the first part about the majority. Right now, it takes 5 council members to make a decision, but if the city manager or the bureaucracy wants to drag their feet and you want to move this, get rid of the city manager, it actually takes 6 votes. So right now, you actually need a supermajority to really force the bureaucracy to do anything. So if you want to, either way you slice that, just because you have 5 votes doesn't mean you're going to force the city. You could use other tactics to address that. Now with the redistricting, the good thing is that we passed the independent redistricting commission, which is one of the reasons that I think it's important to also have a mayor that's driving the bureaucracy, because what happened before independent redistricting in 2016 is the districts were carved out to protect council members. And what it ended up doing was separating and cutting the communities, particularly the Black community, the Latino community, and the API community, into 6 different council districts. So the answer to your question is that the new council member would be drawn in with the new redistricting, independent redistricting commission, outside of the control of the council. Measure B that is on the ballot now actually does a technical change to make sure that you can actually do that. But the one thing to know is that because you have different districts, right now, if a particular community feels harmed, particularly, I'm just talking, for example, with this increased rise in Latino COVID cases, you had to get at least 6 council members to make any decision happen, not 5, but 6, because of the gerrymandering that happened. Now, let's hope that doesn't happen with an independent redistricting commission. But I hope that with that level of force, you can have a community that's spread out throughout the city, be able to also put that level of pressure on the bureaucracy through an elected mayor. But the good thing is an independent redistricting commission will come into place and take the politics out of the council in drawing the new lines. It'll be 8 council districts if the measure fails. It'll be 9 council districts if the measure passes.
Okay, so Flo or Jennifer, do you want to comment?
On the redistricting question?
Yeah, or anything that was just said. The other, and if you don't, that's fine. We can go on to something else.
Well,
Maybe
I did want to comment more generally.
Fine.
Okay. So you know, this is, I always ask the question when something is on my ballot, what problem is this solving? And the pro side has been unable to describe what that problem is, because if you were to listen to the debate at City Council, they described the city manager as the perfect man, and that's a literal quote. Everybody who spoke on the dais complimented him on his work. And so if he's not the problem, then this must be a management issue, because he's not wrong in saying that if one of you comes to me and asks for something, you need 4 other people to do that. That's the way it's written in the charter, is that you as a collective are my bosses. And the city manager has come to the council and asked on more than one occasion for them to set priorities. He asked for 3 to 5. They gave him 19. So if he's not executing their will, it's because they have not made their will clear. And so again, as somebody who has staff, that's a management issue. And the management can certainly, you know, change the way that they engage. But I do want, and so the idea that they're not nimble is a question that I really have to raise as a serious consideration. When Mayor Steinberg wanted to pass his 911 reforms and think about public safety, an emergency meeting was put on the agenda, and that happened really quickly. You know, there is certainly an ability to be able to move nimbly when we want to. And so that's not stopping us right now. And, you know, I'm an epidemiologist. I'm definitely concerned about COVID-19. It has hard hit our Black and our Latino population and our indigenous population here. And that is really sad. But what's telling to me is that 82%, according to the poll that the mayor cited, 82% of Sacramentans agreed with a mask ordinance weeks before the county and the state passed one. And we never heard about that in terms of it being actually taken up as a council member agenda. And the idea was because, well, it wouldn't be popular. But how would we know that it wouldn't be popular among the council members if we don't bring it forward? And why wouldn't you bring something forward that over 80% of your city is saying that they want to do? So when the mayor uses that as an example of what he would do as an executive order if he were strong mayor, as opposed to, you know, just bringing it forward for 5 votes, I question him, because Councilmember Guerra is my council member. I know he would have voted for a mask ordinance, and I think the mayor could have gotten to 5 votes very easily. And so I question why we need more authority in a seat when there's nothing that's been brought forward thus far that the mayor's wanted to do that he's really failed on. And so this is sort of an answer without a problem, and that's really challenging.
Okay, thank you. So we got a couple other questions here. One is sort of back to this question that didn't feel like it got answered. How is a $40 million earmark to be, how is that considered responsible regardless of the state of the economy? That's one thing. And then there was another question too about why now this is being done. And it has been turned down by the voters 2 or 3 times. So what's the rush to do this now suddenly to get it on the November ballot? So I guess we'll go to Jim.
And actually, before we go to you, thank you, Eric Guerra, for being here. I know he has to leave for another meeting, so I just want to thank him for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. And thank you, Maggie, for pulling it together and for dealing with all the technical issues too. Appreciate that.
Thanks.
I'm not the technical one, but you're welcome. Thank you. Okay, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. Regarding the 40 million, in Measure A, it sets a baseline of investment that represents a small percentage of the city's $600 million budget. In hard times, communities of color and youngsters are always the first to get cut. And what this represents in Measure A is an unprecedented commitment to those communities and fulfilling the promise of Measure U on a long-term basis, which of course we've seen through the crises that we're living right now, that now more than ever, we have to have this type of a substantial commitment to disenfranchised communities.
Jennifer, do you want to speak? Would you like to address that?
Well, I think Dr. Kofer, as the chair of the Measure U committee, would likely speak with the most authority and credibility on this. I guess I would just offer, since I raised it as one of the concerns I had too, the city charter is an awkward place to make a budget allocation. I looked through a whole bunch of different city charters across the state. I couldn't find any. We don't have any others within our city charter, so this is sort of a precedent. And I guess I would revert back to, we get the government we want. We get the budget investments that we choose to make. And if we're committed, even in hard times, to giving $40 million to youth and inclusive investments, then we should stay dedicated to that and continue to do it. We shouldn't need to bind our hands in our charter, along with other elements that some of us find more problematic in order to get it.
So we are kind of getting towards the end here. I don't see any new questions. I mean, we've asked, I see redistricting questions. So I think what we'll do at this point is to take a minute statement from everybody. I don't think there are any other questions that have not been at least asked. There are more questions about the redistricting and how's that going to be fair and diverse if it's done by an independent commission. And then the 40 million we did. So I don't see any new questions. So let's go to, why don't we go to Jim and then Flo, or since Jennifer just went, Jim, would you like to do you have any sort of closing remarks for the last, minute and a half?
Yes. First of all, I want to thank everybody for their kind attention and very incisive and insightful questions, and also to Dr. Kofer and to Ms. Faring for eloquent, expression of their point of view. Budget is policy, and it's not going to be the best way to move forward. If we want to build a Sacramento, build back better, as they say, after the epidemic, we need to have a situation where the mayor proposes a budget, not the city manager, and that budget reflects the values of the community, and then it goes to the city council for deliberation and debate, and people, find certain cuts or increases that need to be made, and that the public is totally involved in a budget process. That really doesn't happen when the city manager proposes the budget and basically oversees all the departments. What we're looking here is, as Al Smith says, the cure for democracy is more democracy. And that's what this proposal does. Thank you.
Flo?
Yes, thank you for having me, and thank you to Jim and to Councilmember Guerra and others who, and Jennifer and everyone else who's here this evening. The way that our council currently works is that the city manager works at the pleasure of the council. And so the council has the responsibility to make these things happen. I'm actually really surprised that so many council members want to cede the authority that we've already given them to one person, especially when they have the power right now with just 5 votes, with the exception of firing the city manager, which requires 6, to be able to do all of the things that we want them to. And in fact, they're in a hurry right now to be able to do them in advance for November so that they can say to you, yes, see, this wasn't just about that, we can do it. And so my question is, then just do it. Why do we have to consider these things together? If this is really important, you should do it. I also just want to point out that, in opposition is a broad coalition of folks, folks sometimes who don't always get together and side on the same side of things. We have, everyone from the firefighters to SEIU. We have lots of organizations, including the League of Women Voters. And so there are lots of folks in one of the Democratic parties. So there are a lot of people who are in opposition to this, in part because there's so many things in it and because the timing of this is just so precarious. Our neighborhoods have not had a chance to weigh in, and the equity proposals don't have teeth. So please don't fall for, the name of this and saying that it's going to be accountability and equity. It's not actually that. And we have the ability right now to do that. And so we don't have to make this charter change in order for the good things in there that you like to happen.
Since endorsements were mentioned, I do need to mention that we are backed by the Central Labor Council, also an SEIU local, also the Latino Economic Council, which I represent. And we have endorsements that we're very proud of, like I said before, like the Central Labor Council. Thank you.
I did have one last question, which it was out there, which is, given that the city turned this down in the past, and I don't know if Flo needs to speak to this or Jim, why is it on the ballot again? Jim, do you have a?
Well, again, I think I said it in my opening statements. We're living in unprecedented times. I think that when you look at the fact that our mayor runs citywide, but then becomes one of 9 votes. Most people think that the mayor is in charge of everything, and the fact of the matter is he doesn't have the authority. So you can't hold a mayor or a city council with the kind of demands that people are making about police reform and inclusive economic investment. You can't hold people accountable for something they don't have the authority when the authority resides in the city manager. So I think that the COVID epidemic, the demonstrations, over George Floyd showed that people, we had 2,000 people die in at the mayor's house thinking that he could solve everything. And frankly, you can't hold somebody accountable if you don't provide them the authority. And in this case, we are providing the authority to the city council and to the mayor. That's why now, because we're living in unprecedented times. And also Congresswoman Doris Matsui has endorsed this proposition.
That's a good reason to vote no.
Just because I let Jim go, do you just want to just a few closing remarks, Flo, since he had, I just want to make sure the timing's even.
Oh, sure. It's really curious that, this is the same question that came up when we had the SACB interview. And it was like, well, people around the country, are doing things with their policing and whatever else. Our mayor came up with some proposals around policing and had a 24-hour turnaround and got all of them passed. So the idea that he can't get things done that he wants to is simply not proven with facts, with evidence of what's happened here. And I would also point out that I'm still waiting for the answer of how this makes the mayor more accountable. He's still an elected official. He's still elected by the same people, and he still has the responsibility of making one of those 9 votes. And he has the ability to set agendas and to be able to move us in a direction. So I don't know how giving him more power makes him more accountable. But if you're thinking, oh, well, he could move more nimbly on things like police reform, he hasn't taken the city auditor's recommendations to consider binding arbitration, which would, free them up to be able to renegotiate some of the police contracts. They, as a council, they haven't been responsive to the police commission and their recommendations for multiple years. So if we're talking about accountability, I don't see how giving more power when there have been overt attempts to not listen to members of the community makes him more accountable. He still has the same elections and the same responsiveness. And so I think it's important to consider that as part of what you're considering when you vote.
Yeah, thank you. We just wanted to give, thank you very much, Flo and Jim. And I just wanted to give Jennifer, 30 seconds to say something too. And then we're gonna have to wrap it up and move on to the UC Davis presentation.
All right. Thank you, Maggie, and thanks to my fellow neighbors here in Elmhurst and others at the other neighborhood associations, and to Dr. Kofer and Jim. I appreciated this dialogue, and thank you for letting someone from the community here participate. I just wanted to close by saying I think it's possible to really like and respect our mayor and still vote no on this measure. This is not a referendum on the job he's doing, and it's not a referendum on even your relationship to him. I enjoy a positive one, and I want him to succeed, and I want Sacramento to succeed. That doesn't mean that thoughtful people can't disagree. I urge all of my neighbors on this call and otherwise to read the measure yourself, develop your own perspective on it, and to watch the council meetings if you like. They were on July 27th and August 4th. I put in the notes that Councilmember Carr did a very significant presentation that I found really informative about the different types of council measures, and I know there are other presentations upcoming between now and the election that others are going to offer that will provide us all with more perspectives and history on these types of government types, and I'm grateful that so many people in the midst of terrible suffering and troubles are taking the time to learn more about something like this on our local ballot. So thanks, Maggie, for hosting.
Thank you, and thank you again, Flo and Jim and Jennifer, for being with us. And if there are people have more questions, we can certainly share those. And Manuel wants to remind everybody to vote. So for those who are going to stay on the call, we are going to have a presentation from UC Davis about some development of parking lot on V Street and the I Center. And thank you again, everybody, for your presentations. Thank you. Oh, Manuel, do we have the UC Davis people? You're muted. You're muted.
Got it. If you are, I'm looking for Joel.
Yes, I'm here.
There you are. Okay,
can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. I'm going to make you the co-host and
Perfect.
then spotlight your video, and you're welcome to share your screen.
Perfect.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you to the whole association of Elmhurst. Some of you know me because we've been having a lot of conversations over the years. And what I'd like to share today is focus in on part of what we're doing. I'm trying to share my screen, so bear with me a little bit here. Can you folks see a map on the screen?
Yes, sir.
We can see your screen.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, that means we've succeeded. The meeting's a success. Now, thank you. I am really excited about the number of folks that you have on this call. We hold these meetings oftentimes at the Cancer Center or other locations, and it's only been a couple of times that I can think of us having this kind of coverage. So if there's a positive that we're able to engage better. So again, my name is Joel Swift. I am an architect, director of facilities planning and development, and my role that is at UC Davis Health. So I work for Vice Chancellor Lebarski. I also have a side job working on the Aggie Square team. So I also work on that. I think the last time we talked to this group, we had a great conversation about Aggie Square, but I was going to focus on another part of the campus. And I just would also like to introduce some of the folks that are here with me as well. Samara Lull is an architect as well, and she's our project manager on the ICE Center.
No.
And Stephen Wright.
Is he rolling it? Yeah.
Is there a problem? Stephen Ryland is our project manager for the parking structure. So I just take a moment on this map. This is our long-range development plan update. Many of you, I know some of you have been in Elmhurst for years, have weighed in on different versions of this over the years. It's our living document over our what other folks call a master plan, but in this case, long-range development plan. And you can see it's divided the campus, which borders on V Street on the north, and Stockton Boulevard on the west, and then Broadway on the south, and then the backside of neighborhoods on the east. It's divided into different districts, we'll call them. In the past, we spent a lot of time talking about the hospital. I wasn't going to talk too much about that today. And I think many of you have seen us expand and develop our education core, the pink area in the middle, which hosts our School of Medicine and now our School of Nursing and the Vanderhoff Commons. And that is really the core of why we're here from the education and research perspective. And the area to the south, the yellow area, to shift it a little bit, this is probably the biggest change. We call it collaboration and research. It involves the hotel, the inpatient rehab hospital, Governor's Hall, and now Aggie Square. So that area is sort of an area that we're really working on, and we've had over 100 meetings with a lot of the community groups about how we can have that be more of an opportunity to be more engaged with the community. But that is, in a sense, Aggie Square. The area I want to talk about a little bit today is the patient care area, which is outpatient. Many of you know the ACC building as our largest, it's actually our largest outpatient clinic, which is kind of in the center here. And on the left side of that orange area is the cancer center. Many of you know that as well too. That's our comprehensive cancer center. It's actually the one of the largest facilities of its kind in the sense that it has pediatric and adult and all of the levels of cancer treatment. And many of us have had friends and family who've benefited from that. So that orange area is an area that we're working on. We call it the northeast corner of our campus. And we'll talk about the two projects in that area that are active right now.
So this is the side that.
So we'll talk a little bit about the Shannon Eye Center, or the Shannon Eye Institute. That's our Department of Ophthalmology, and that is under construction right now. Some of you have been engaged with that as well too. You can see the fences that are up, and you'll see some of the steel going up this fall, and we went through some difficult demolition of some of the areas of the ACC. But this facility, Ernest Shannon, you may have heard of him. He's been a great philanthropist for the Sacramento area, with Sacramento State, ourselves, and others. And he really, one of our eye surgeons did surgery on him, and he was so taken aback that he really wanted to further eye health. And eye health is so critical to so many areas. And our ophthalmology group, in fact, goes worldwide promoting this. And so they really took this as an opportunity to build what we call an eye institute. The other 4 UC hospitals have one already. And the goal really is expanding patient care and really tackling some major eye disease that some of our researchers are working on, and having the right kind of environment in that building for that. So many of us have different levels of failing eyesight or family members that benefit from this. And the facility is really seen as bringing forward the medical and healthcare technology that really supports UC Davis expanding our community support for eye health. And we can come back to this. Maybe I'll go through these. I forgot to ask, I only had 2.5 minutes, but I'll keep talking until someone shuts me up. Anyway, so if anybody has any family members who use our current facility, you'll know that this is going to be quite a change in terms of the type of structure. That is under construction now. And that project actually will open in a little over 2 years. Turning to the sort of the site plan, I like diagrams and site plans. Some people can really benefit from that. Other people like pictures, but this diagram is something that Samara's team is working on. And again, it's McCarthy Construction is the builder of this facility. You've seen fences go up and being moved and maneuvered around so we can maintain the red line of access to our parking structure and to the ACC. And of course, COVID-19 made it even more challenging because we've had to restrict how people go in and out of our buildings. But at the end of the day, that blue area where it says Eye Center Construction Area, that will be the new structure, 4-story building addition to the ACC. And the blue area to the right of this diagram actually is, staging area for that work. So we will see the steel go up, and we've been working on a host of mitigations. We can talk about that, and I think Samara can fill you in if there's any questions on that in terms of getting through this work in a manner that's as effective as possible. So the other portion of today's conversation is just north of there. If you look at that diagram, which is Lot 18 staff parking, there's a little green patch and a brown patch at the north end of that diagram. And there's that circle that's at X and 48th. We've been doing a lot of work with all of our traffic patterns, And I will say that first diagram that I shared with you, you can look it up online. It's in the slide deck, but you can also go to the link. One of the things that with all of our planning is obviously traffic and parking are critical for us and how we manage those. And I will say for the folks who've been involved with from the Elmhurst side for many years, we've been really trying to manage our northern edge boundary, if you will, V Street. And so to that end, we had always planned on a parking structure in the area. In this diagram, this is 48th Street coming up. We're actually taking out that roundabout. It was a noble idea. It didn't really work in that condition. And as our traffic folks looked at it, they said it's better to have more of a standard four-way stop in there. And what we have done, and this is part of the collective work to reduce traffic through Elmhurst, is basically 48th Street used to drive through. Then we put a bunch of plastic bollards and people drove across those. And then a couple of years ago, we put the concrete bollards. We're now reducing that to pedestrian and bike. We want to encourage pedestrian bike for the folks in the neighborhood, but also 48th Street, of course, lines up with that light rail station. So we are actually strengthening the bike and pedestrian link and taking away a vehicular link so that there is no access to this structure from the Elmhurst side. And you'll see in the diagrams, we're really see this an extension of that with a pathway and making it a pleasant place for everybody on the northern edge. And then, as I mentioned, the roundabout gets replaced with a standard intersection, and that construction, that Stevens project, that construction starts here in the next month. And I will say this is just one of many solutions. Some people say, why are we even building parking structures? We should just force everybody to take transportation. Well, it's not as simple as that. It has to be balanced. We know that if we didn't do this, people would be shopping for parking in all of our neighborhoods around us and be pushing out our problem into the community, which has been an issue in the past. So this is a balance to that, but it is part of a broader traffic plan, which is right now with COVID-19, it's a little bit on hold because not a lot of people are working remotely. But ultimately, our transportation plan really relies on a whole management plan, TDM, that actually really leverages all of our resources so we can balance the investment in parking with other solutions that don't create traffic at all. So the last imagery for this gives you a sense of what we're trying to achieve. The image on the upper left is actually the pedestrian link that links us back to the ACC and Eye Center. This structure is primarily, it's completely envisioned as employee parking. Parking structure 2, the existing structure, is planned to convert to patient and family parking. So that'll be the most convenient for them to be right next to the ACC. And then this parking structure actually serves the hospital, cancer center, and the ACC. So you can see from the southern side, the southwest view, again, traffic comes in and out on the 2 corners on the south side. No traffic to the north, I think I mentioned that. And then on the north side, the upper image, that's we've pressed the designers to manage that design so that it has, again, not only the green space, but also a lot of efforts to avoid vehicle light out of that structure. And so there's a quiet building. It becomes a backdrop, if you will, for what we feel is the least impactful to the neighborhood, in the sense that we're not going to have anybody's offices along that alignment. It is people that come and park in and they go about their business. The last piece on this project, and it's similar to what Sac State just built with their parking structure 5. This is prefabricated off-site. Actually, the plant is in Woodland, so it's local labor building it, and then they actually bring it in and assemble it on site. So it's actually faster than our previous parking structures. And much of the work, if you can imagine, the energy of all the pieces being fabricated off-site is not happening on site. So to that end, what we're aiming at is an efficient and quick construction build phase for the project. So I think that's about it that I have on the presentation. I'd like to see if either Stephen or Samara, if I missed anything, and then open it up if there's any questions. So Samara, was there anything that you would like to add on the Ice Center and the ACC projects?
No, thank you, Joel. I think you did a great job covering everything. I do want to say hello and give a shout out to those of you who came and did a tour of the site recently. It's really good to see your faces all again, and we hope we're getting a better report card from you guys, so you're not shy about letting us know how you're doing. So thanks for that.
Right,
You
and
covered
Laura
mine
posted
quite
in the
well,
chat.
Joel.
Well, okay. Well, one thing is that so the projects are, maybe 6-8 months apart in timing. So, and Laura had posted about there is a link on making sure that if there's any questions from this group, from this meeting, or as we go forward with any of these projects, please reach out to her and she can filter it to any of the folks that can answer any of the types of questions that you might have. And then Stephen's project will be bringing on sort of the construction very soon, and so he likewise will be doing some reach out to the ENA and some of the folks to make sure that we are communicating the process. So I see a question from Deborah, and the question on chat is, it seems the V Street side of the parking structure is open. What will the interior lighting be like? Will it have those red-green lights that show what spots are open? That is a really good question, and I'll let Stephen talk a little more detail about that. There is a thing with parking structures; they do need to be open just because of the fumes in a structure. Because although there's more and more electric cars, we have to design them for the fuel engines that we need to let them ventilate. So yes, they will have some of those directional lights, and they will be back about 20 feet from the face of the wall. And maybe, Stephen, you could fill in a little more detail on that and also respond to Shelby's question about the construction hours.
We're using a new piece of technology called an Eco Falcon, and it's an LED style lighting. Like Joel mentioned, they're 20 feet back from the face of the building, and that plus the 40-foot setback. We have a complete light study, a photometrics study done for this to ensure that there won't be light spill. If you look at that upper right-hand picture that Joel was pointing out, you have the face of structure is sunk almost 3 feet. And then we have the wall height is designed so the initial floor will be below grade, so you won't see the headlights from your next floor up. It's windows from that side either.
So yeah, part of this is leveraging the technology we have now that just even a decade ago with the LED lights wasn't the same, and also the technology of availability of parking has shifted a little bit. And then thirdly, again, this is more of an employee parking structure, so we shouldn't have people circling through there in terms of the way, the patient model is a little different. So Rick Henry, question on chat. Will the new intersection at 48th and Street be a 4-way stop using stoplights or traffic lights?
We're going to have it's a fully signalized intersection in all directions. It even includes bicycle transit. So it's basically an 8-way intersection. I think our car count now, it can handle up to 2,500 cars an hour, which means you've got easy in, easy out of the structure, much less idle time. And as Joel mentioned, that lowers the fumes. And we also have 96 stalls for electric charging vehicles that will be built into the structure from day one.
Right, and so that it wasn't driven by the number of trips, but this diversity of use. We want to make sure the pedestrian and bikes are safe as well. Maggie pointed out we missed a question on the construction hours. Stephen, can you give some clarity to that?
Current construction hours are slated to be 7 to 4, Monday through Friday. During the long days of summer, I believe by ordinance we can go to 6. There will be some construction when they're first bringing the project on site. that will probably encounter the longer days, but they feel most of their construction will be 7 to 4 daily.
Thank you. Let's see. I'm sure there are other questions. Oh. So let's go back. I'll go back to the diagram, Rick, just to give everybody a chance to look at it. So the question here is about the other little leg of traffic. Let me explain that a little bit. So in our master plan, you can go back to our master plan, and it goes back to the 2010 master plan. There's a second structure in the future plan to the left, kind of where it says 48th Street Bike and the arrow there. Well, in the short term, we need to bring in traffic to that parking lot. So yes, the notion is that we have traffic inbound that turns left and crosses over that pedestrian link. And that's one of the driveways that feed into the parking that's existing and future on that left-hand side of the diagram, if that makes sense. So the notion is that the primary in to the structure are the 2 lanes on the right-hand side going northbound on 48th, if that makes sense. And then there's 1 lane that would also feed into that lot. And as Stephen pointed out, the intersection, you could basically fill this entire parking structure and that lot in an hour. People don't show up that way. It tends to spread over a couple of hours. But so from a flow perspective, that gives us a flow into the structure as well as the existing lot, if that makes sense.
Joel, you've got a couple other questions there. 49th Street, also whether you could make the diagram any bigger. And I don't know if you're seeing all the questions.
I just saw them. Thank you for, I'm juggling things here. Okay, make the diagram bigger. Oh, and I think the diagram will go out to everybody as well. Let me try something to make that bigger. I'm really tested. Now, the other question was, will the electric car charging spaces be open to neighborhood residents after hours without paying to enter the parking structure? Stephen, maybe you can talk about that.
In the beginning of this, sure.
Before you do, we're also modeling all of the electric charging on campus. So there's a broader question here. So this is meeting the demand that this structure has, but there is overall parking e-vehicle parking too. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. There was another question as well. Let's see. The way I understand it, with Mike Godfrey from parking, that the lot will be metered by card access in the beginning. I know there is a possibility future plan of transitioning over to a public-private parking structure, and then that would be up to parking. They manage and run the parking structure for the university.
Yeah, I guess it's worth restating. This is an employee parking structure. So one of the things we're doing is going to card access for that. And actually what it does is there's a way that you can manage people's parking by the amount they pay, and if they only pay daily permits, to get them motivated to use other modes too. So at least as a start, this structure is seen as employee only or someone with a pass only. So that might be the difficult location for electric charging. There's a broader question that we need to tackle with about electric charging for the whole campus, because we have other charging locations, and of course, working with SMUD, we're actually rolling out even more electric charging as well.
So just to go back on the chat, Joel, it looks like you did miss a couple questions. Did you
yeah, no, I'm trying to keep up, just trying to keep up here. You guys are going so fast on me here.
Roll back up, I think. Thank you.
Some other questions on 49th Street.
There was a question, will these projects, will there be any change to the traffic pattern on 49th is one question. And then there was a question about the end of 4 p.m. end of construction. Do you see those questions on there?
Yeah. I think I'll let Steve talk about the construction hours. 49th Street. So yes, 49th Street we know is an active challenge. It seems like no matter what kind of barriers we put in there, we've tried to harden that edge more and more so that to not make it easy for people to cut through Elmhurst. Right now, the biggest change is actually right now where we're basically bringing people into the ACC parking structure, and once the I Institute is over, it would revert back to an in and out off of 48th. So yes, the current situation where we have people coming out of that area is really just a function of us having to get through the construction. And we've been slowly reducing the vehicle access from that corner. Believe me, I stepped on a hornet's nest of staff and faculty when we did the last move and made it hard for people to take a left turn. But I think we need to also revisit continuing to strengthen that, and that will be that when we finish this construction, we really want to promote people only coming from the 48th Street side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Jill.
Wrong answer.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. That's what we're looking into right now. So your point about the fact that all the cars that are going to the ACC right now all have to exit on 49th. That is the most extreme it's going to be. So once the I-Center is completed, then we can split the traffic again, and people will have the choice of going east and west, and we're reevaluating how they actually exit onto 49th. So that's a great question. We are keeping our eye on that. And I think the other question that I saw was related to the actual construction hours of the I-Center project and whether or not they would be reduced to end at 4 p.m. to match Stevens' project for the parking structure. And the response to that question is we actually have two EIR documents, environmental impact report documents, which I believe has been shared with your group. And while the majority of the elements of those EIRs are similar between the two projects, there are differences. And the construction hours is one of those differences. And the reason, as I've been told, is because the parking structure has a little buffer between the neighborhood and the site itself, whereas the I-Center has a much greater buffer. So that's why they were comfortable extending that to 6 p.m. So hopefully, Deborah, that answers your question. Did we miss anything else?
Sometimes people think of things afterwards. We certainly encourage everybody to reach out with any questions you have. I know this is a lot of information, giving you some of the nuts and bolts of our projects. Really appreciate the opportunity to share with everybody here. And I know we've been bumping back and forth. I think we picked off the questions that people have here, but certainly we can follow up as needed. There are other activities on our campus, and we can come back to this group. I'd love to come back and share, some of the other updates as they roll out.
Yeah, it looks like Rick had a couple more questions, and then I don't know if the question about will there be pedestrian access on 48th Street going south, did that get answered? Will the ACC parking garage exit onto 49th be closed? I don't know, did those questions get answered?
Yeah, I answered the one on the 49th question, but on the pedestrian, we did miss that. Absolutely. The existing pedestrian, other than in this diagram that's on the screen now, the existing pedestrian link obviously needs to stay because we want to make, one of our goals that we didn't talk about is making it a safe and comfortable pathway for our, the west side of 48th. That is seen as a major pedestrian link to the education zone and also to bring folks to the ACC. And then, of course, the sidewalks that are on X Street link you to the...
So, Joel, it looks like you got
Sure.
a couple more here. What will the future site be just east of the new parking garage? At one time, there was talk of 2 parking structures
Yes.
at that corner. Is that
Yes,
still
I know I said that really quickly, but on this diagram, the overall master plan shows parking structure 5 to be at that location. So there would be a similar parking type structure. And we didn't mention it, but it does step down. It's actually a floor and a deck and a half shorter as it steps towards V Street. And you would imagine that you'd have a similar structure that would be on the west side of 48th Street. Again, we see this as an important link, that pedestrian link that is 48th Street. And if you look at our plan, to the further west is the water tower, and then you have the hospital block.
And then what's the future clinical site going to be?
Okay, that's great. So that is the master plan of that orange part of that diagram, the first diagram I shared. Those are outpatient clinical sites, and that was in the 2010 master plan. So we're really kind of carrying that through. You can see they're different scale and size. Originally, the plan was to have a quote unquote medical mall, and I think that's still part of what our plans are with the ACC and the Eye Center being sort of the next development. Outpatient clinical needs, those would fill in those zones. And I can't say what they might be today, but again, with a long-range development plan, it's basically like a big box that allows us to put these blocks into it when we're ready to. So for those sites right now, but we wanted to leave, buildable pads and then have a good pedestrian link through there, so that from either parking structure 2 or this one parking structure 4, people have good access to those sites.
Okay, well, we really appreciate your presentation. Are there any other questions? Deborah, did you want to unmute? Do you have any comments you want to make in kind of closing or wrapping this up? Anybody? Okay. Well, both of these presentations have been recorded and will be available, and we will be posting the links. Oh, okay. We do have one question, which is that the construction, as some of us are familiar with, the construction that goes on in UC Davis does not require city permits like city projects do. So why is that?
Hey, that's a great question. So the Regents of California are, believe it or not, their own legal entity. So ownership of that land is controlled by the Regents. And as a consequence, we work very closely with our host cities. We work with Council Member Garrett, glad to see him today, as with Jay Chenier and the mayor and a lot of the staff. We work even closer now. But our responsibility is to the Regents, and the Regents are our body, our legal body that approves the projects on University Regents' own property. That makes sense. So our process for these projects is we go through an environment similar. We do the same environmental review as any other development. It's just this little island that is called UC Davis within the circle of Sacramento. We actually go through a process where it goes to the Regents for approval, not the city of Sacramento. However, I will say we do send all the documents out. The city of Sacramento is really one of the people that comment. So do all of you. If there's ever, in fact, if you go to the link that's on our first page, you can see what we have that's live right now. So we are forever bringing forward projects, and the process, instead of the city of Sacramento as the entity that approves it, it's the Board of Regents of California. And they meet every 2 months. They meet on Wednesday. So they, that's a little bit of the legalese that we deal with of any UC project that is on Regents' own property.
Thank you. So I'm going to do this as the last question. I think it should be quick. Are the ceiling lights from the parking structure going to be visible from the outside, i.e. V Street?
Steven's muted.
Sorry. Yes, ma'am, they will be visible. The light spill is photometrically designed with the LED lights. They are very directional. So we've made every effort to be respectful to the neighborhood. We still do have to meet code for photometrics for the amount of light for safety. But there's been a great deal of attention paid to how those are focused, which way they're pointing, that there won't be any on the perimeters of the building. You know, you will get you will get some ceiling light visible at a distance, just like looking in somebody's front window.
Okay, I think with that, we're gonna wrap this up. And again, I want to thank the
Maggie?
presenters. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, it's Deborah. I just wanted to mention a couple of points before you wrap up, if that's okay. I can't quite figure out all these buttons. Can you hear me? I think what I would ask for the parking structure project, and it's very helpful to the most adjacent residences, that prior to any of the actual construction activity, if you could please send out notices. You know, you could send them to the neighborhood association, we could post them, but also if you could reach out to those most effective, just to let them know the timing that it's going to come, so we're not having as much of a reaction. And based on the last comments with the lighting, I would say I think at least several of us were very disappointed that the UC didn't reach out to the neighborhood previously when you were in the design development process with respect to any of the plans, to get any kind of neighborhood input into the design features. And we would welcome that opportunity and your consideration to do that on future projects that are so close to the boundaries of the neighborhood. But I think what we would ask with some of these lighting issues and traffic issues, that once the garage does open, that you come back and meet with us and we could garner up some comments and issues that the most close neighbors may voice. And if you could work with us on those issues, we'd really appreciate it.
Okay, fair enough. Well, again, thank you. Appreciate all the great comments, and we have some work to do, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And to all the neighbors who came, thank you. And please join us. We are going to actually, we're going to wrap up our meeting. We still have spaces on the board though, so feel free to find out about joining the ENA board. Thank all the board members, and Manuel, thank you for doing the Zoom. So we'll be sure you're on our email list to get details, and we'll send out the information about how you can see the recording. Thank you. And the slides too, yeah. All right, thank you everybody.
Thank you.